Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Karli Okeson, and I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and Emory University. And I'm so happy to be starting this initiative of MEDLAW Learning, where we've been able to provide this medical education to the legal community to help elaborate and collaborate on these various topics that are intertwined in your legal cases. It's been so wonderful connecting with some of you and working with the Stephanie V. Blank Center on this lecture series. So this month we have a lineup of different talks. I hope that they are both relevant with a different aspect that's new and interesting to you all. And I appreciate everyone who's completed the pre-course survey, and I'll be sending a post-course survey after each lecture and a 3-month follow-up as well to see if these concepts are useful and applicable in your courtroom settings. So that leads us into our first topic, which is adverse childhood experiences. I feel so fortunate to be giving this lecture with Judge Michael Key. He's a juvenile court judge who's done tremendous work to improve childhood trauma and implement trauma responsive courts. So I'll be doing the part about the adverse childhood experiences and information surrounding the study, and then Judge Key will discuss how to implement these concepts into your courtroom practices. So let's get started. So ACEs is really a topic that has transformed my life. I've done most of my research in this area. This concept of adverse childhood experiences has not only allowed me to view my patients in a better light, but has helped me connect with others on a deeper level to really understand what they're going through and where they're coming from. And I hope this perspective can help in your work and interactions with others as well. So ACEs are traumatic events that they happen before the age of 18 years old, and they can confer multiple medical and mental health sequelae throughout the life course. And I want to give you a little story about how it all started. It started with this doctor in California, Dr. Felidi, and he ran a large preventative health and obesity clinic through Kaiser Permanente. And he noticed an unusual phenomenon that a lot of his patients who are severely obese, once they started to get to a healthy level, and a healthy weight, they would drop out of the program and then rebound and often would have a higher weight gain than they had before it started. So he decided to interview his patients and he found this common theme that really shocked him. And he had noticed that a lot of people had a history of childhood trauma and most had endured sexual abuse in their childhood. And one patient's story really stood out to him. She said that she had started gaining weight at a young age when her grandfather had started sexually abusing her. And for her, gaining weight was a mechanism to make herself less desirable, somewhat as a protective wall for her. And so when she started losing weight in the program, she started getting noticed more. More guys would compliment her on her looks. And this caused her so much trauma and anxiety that she started gaining the weight right back. And the same account he noticed happened in a lot of his patients. And so he decided that he needed to study this more. And so he partnered with the CDC and they embarked on this groundbreaking study. And throughout this study, there's been one central theme that he noticed in all of his patients, and that is what we see as the problem turns out to be somebody's solutions to problems we know nothing about. And this is just central to this concept. And I like to kind of put it into your guys' world in the court system and think about a time when you maybe had somebody who was maybe aggressive or combative, and in your courtroom, and imagine now that that person grew up in a household where he or she was beaten or abused, and really the only way that they knew how to survive was to be aggressive or combative back. So now they're in your courtroom, there's an obvious level of authoritative figures, he feels threatened, and the only way they really know how to communicate or how to survive in that moment is to be aggressive and combative. And so this theme can kind of go into your courtroom as well. What we see as the problem, the aggressiveness, the combativeness, turns out to be his solution, his survival mechanism to problems that we knew nothing about, which is the history of childhood abuse. And if we can really understand this, then we can look to communicate better and foster a more cohesive and enlightened environment to help them understand what they're going through and connect on that deeper level. And so that is like the key goal into all of this. And so let's talk a little bit about more what the study showed and the specifics into that. So today we're going to describe adverse childhood experiences, identify resilience factors and positive childhood experiences, this is making me annotate something. And then apply strategies for change. So, what are adverse childhood experiences? So, the study in the 90s had between Kaiser and the CDC had made 10 traditional ACEs that we consider as the 10 traditional ones. There's been some since then. But what these are in three areas. So, abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So that includes physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and then household dysfunction, having a caregiver have mental illness, witnessing intimate partner violence, parental separation or divorce, incarceration, and then substance misuse or dependence. And what they did is that they surveyed over 17,000 participants. They were mostly white, middle class, insured individuals, highly educated. And what they found was that 2/3 of people had at least one ACE, and 1 in 8 people had an ACE score of greater than 4. So this tells us that ACEs are common, and they don't usually occur just in isolation. If you have one ACE, you're more likely to have more ACEs. And more so, they showed that if you have increased ACEs, then you have an increased probability of having different medical effects later on in life. So you're at increased risk for having injury, mental health, such as depression, anxiety, suicide, PTSD, maternal health issues, infectious diseases, such as HIV and STDs, chronic diseases, such as cancer, diabetes, COPD, autoimmune conditions, and other risky behaviors, such as alcohol and drug abuse, unsafe sex, and then decrease opportunities in your education and your occupation. They showed that people can have 3 times more the risk for having smoking or lung disease, 14 times more likely to attempt suicide, 4.5 times more likely to develop depression, 11 times more likely to have injected street drugs, 4 times more likely to have intercourse by age 15, and 2 times more likely to have liver disease. And even without some of those high risk behaviors we're talking about, people still were at an increase for having these health conditions. And ACEs is shown to increase your risk of having 7 out of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States, including heart disease, cancer, COPD, diabetes, suicide. And recently, the American Academy of Pediatrics former president said adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. That's so important. Why is this? It's because ACEs are so common, the effects are so drastic, and having preventative strategies are really needed in our community today. The study also showed that it has a dose-response relationship. So this means that the more ACEs you have, the more likely you are to have these health effects. And if you have greater than 6 ACEs, you have a 20-year decrease on your life expectancy. That's like a whole grandchild's life that you're missing 20 years off of your life if you have greater than six ACEs. So since the original study, there's been a lot of studies done since, which has corroborated all of this data. They've found new ACEs, more health effects, and there's been a lot of attention on what happens to these kids during their immediate time, during their childhood. There's been increased evidence showing that you have increased risk for ADHD, behavioral complaints, developmental delays, somatic complaints, and teen pregnancy. And what's really important, especially in your guys' realm, is being able to recognize these signs of trauma by age. So you might have an abrupt and very unpredictable shift between withdrawal and aggressive behaviors. You have increased risk taking, so truancy and substance abuse, and then a heightened sensitivity to perceived threats. So these start really early, and then if it's not addressed early enough, then these can obviously progress into worse behavior. I have a quick story that I wanted to share. I had a patient I'll never forget. She was such a sweet girl. She had experienced a lot of trauma in her life. She was sexually abused, parental separation, mental illness in the family, emotional neglect. And we get a lot of kids that come into our ED for, quote, behavioral complaints, where parents aren't sure quite what to do with them. And her mom didn't understand why she was being so withdrawn. She was starting to partake in some risky behaviors with her friends. So she brought her in. And at first I thought her mom was coming to help her and see what we can do. And then her mom said to me, I'm trying to get her enough points to get her into juvie. And at first I was shocked. Like this poor girl, her mom was actually advocating for her to go to jail. It is no wonder why they sometimes end up in front of you in the courtroom. And unfortunately, I've had a few more parents say these types of things to me throughout the years. But it made me pause for a second and think about it. And I realized that the girl is obviously going through so much trauma, but her mom probably is too. And maybe there are some triggers that are that she's going through that they both don't know how to communicate or handle. So I sat them down. I explained what trauma was. I explained the effects of it, how it can present, how we can recognize that, how we can communicate and have a support system with each other. And it really seemed to resonate with them. And they appreciated this different view on how to see that really they're both just acting out on things that happened to them and they just don't know how to process it. And so I like to think that hopefully that conversation made a lasting impact in this family, that you're able to recognize trauma. And that is exactly what trauma informed care is all about. But unfortunately, without this knowledge or when there's this disconnect in the community, you can have a baby so full of life, joy, opportunities turn into this. So in the justice system, they've done lots of studies as well, and they've shown that 90% of juveniles in the justice system have had at least one ACE. A lot of ACEs are from traumatic loss or bereavement or domestic violence. And there was a study done in Florida that showed that the juveniles in their court system had 50% had four or more ACEs, which is a drastic increase from the original ACEs study of who has four or more ACEs. There's other studies that show that 62% of participants experience trauma within the first 5 years of life, which is so vital for their development. Antisocial people who and murderers, they can have an ACE score of around 8, which only like 1 in 1,000 people have an ACE score that high. And 77 to 90% of incarcerated women have extensive histories of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. So really, you guys are seeing this on both ends. There is this cycle where there's such an intersection of ACEs in the court system. So each ACE is affected by the court system in some capacity and in every division, which makes your job so central to this cause. So while the child is experiencing ACEs in real time, you're also most likely handling the caregiver's issues in your court system that's causing these ACEs. So not only is it affecting the people in front of you, but it's affecting their whole families, and everyone is taking part in some of this trauma. And that's why it leads to children's traumas often involves the court system. Then they grow up and become involved with the court system from the effects of their trauma. And it's this generational cycle of ACEs that is just so important and really a public health risk to our society. So like I said, they've done lots of studies since. So there's other categories that people consider ACEs. And it really gets to like the root and the foundation of our upbringings and our society. So there's household dysfunction, but there's other community ACEs that can create these downstream effects. That includes poverty, discrimination, violent communities, homelessness, bullying. And this has gotten a lot of attention for sure in the most recent times, that there are different groups and different communities that are just at an increased risk for having ACEs. So why does this all happen? It's really around this thought about toxic stress. So there's different kinds of stresses that we have, different responses that we have. There's positive stress that's more of an acute type of stress, like right before a test or something. It, in a way, can be helpful because it makes you study more and you can get a good grade on that test. There's some tolerable stress where maybe you have a loss of a loved one, you have a grieving process. It's more of an acute stress. It takes a little bit longer to linger off, but it eventually does. But ACEs is what falls into this toxic stress, which is this severe, unremitting, constant stress that is in these people's lives. And this is what is causing all these downstream effects. They've actually shown that the brain architecture can change because of toxic stress. You can have, in the areas where we have decision making and impulse control, there's a decrease in our brain activity and our neurons that are firing. So ultimately, we're mostly just sitting in our fight or flight mode when we're in toxic stress. And then that continues even if we're not in a flight or fight situation, then our brains are still working at that level. But not everyone is going to have these downstream effects. There's lots and lots of talk right now about positive childhood experiences and what can we do to take these kids that have had these adversities and had this trauma, and how can we make them flourish in a way that is productive for everyone, for them, that they can really thrive in these situations. And right now there's a lot of talk about these 7 positive childhood experiences. Feeling like you have someone to talk to in your family about your feelings, feeling a sense of belonging in school and in the community, feeling like your family stood by you in difficult times, that you feel safe and protected by an adult in your home, you feel supported by friends. And the most important one that they've seen tied is having at least 2 adults, functional adults in your life that have taken a genuine interest in you. Someone who has really been there for you and has worked with you through all of this, and has given you a sense of stability in your life. And so with this, we want to culture a way to have protective factors in our lives. So if we have positive childhood experiences and we have protective factors that increase resilience, and people understand normal childhood development and parental interactions, we have good social connections, then if we have good protective factors, then even though we have all of these external factors such as poverty, substance abuse, parental stress, we at least have a good connection and support system within our home to be able to work through these external factors. And that's why a support system is so important. As I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of patients that come in with behavioral complaints. They come through our ED, and it ranges from different things, such as feuds with their family, to mental health concerns, suicidal ideations, homicidal ideations, and then other adolescents coming in for medical treatment as well. And so we always have confidential conversations with our teens, especially to make sure that there's no red flags that require immediate attention. And ACEs have helped me in a way that, we have our typical questions that we're supposed to ask, but I've started to ask new questions. So first you say, do you feel safe at school? Yes. Do you feel safe at home? Yes. But then I started asking, do you feel like you have a support system or someone you can talk to? And they look at me and say, oh, no, 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 no. And so I really feel like this is the key. This is, or the demise to any healthy upbringing. But this is really what everyone needs. Everyone needs a support system. Everyone needs to know they have someone they can lean on in stressful times, that they have a sense of belonging and love and communication and respect. And I think that regardless of what they're going through, which obviously we should address in the immediate time as well, we also need to work as a community to increase these support systems for these people. And that's what we can do. We can help at different levels. We can help at the individual levels by talking with them. People want to talk about their trauma, and so we can recognize what they're going through and ask them about it. At the organizational level, we can make awareness and education and educate people about the concept. And then on the community level, we can provide resources and assistance for these individuals. And at the system level, we can implement widespread change. And we have a unique position where both individuals and the community want to hear this message, and we can portray it in a strong way. Because awareness drives change, talking provides hope, action inspires others, and resilience breaks the cycle. And if anything that we can do, the most important thing is that whenever you go into any interaction with anyone, instead of saying, what is wrong with you? The real question is, what happened to you? And with this, we can do a little something to make a big difference. Thank you so much. I'm going to drop it over to Judge Key so that he can do his section now.
Thank you, Dr. Okeson. We're going to attempt to leave about 15 minutes for questions at the end, so I'll move through some of these slides pretty quickly. I'm excited to see some of our juvenile court judges as participants, and at least one SAG is on here as well. So they're my old friends. I got a lot of new friends here, hopefully as well. I'll just tell you very quickly, we've been on our trauma journey in our court for about 9 years, almost 9 years. But it wasn't until about 4 years ago that I really came to understand how important the culture is. And it came about when I was doing a presentation for state court judges conference. Juvenile court judges see the children. We have a better understanding on an ongoing basis of the impact of the children's adverse experiences and also the court experience, perhaps than other courts do. But I came to realize that as important as doing justice is, I've come to realize that our role is to do justice and promote healing among those we serve, those who serve with us, and within ourselves. And in doing that, the first thing we need to do is create a culture of healing, of cultural well-being in all aspects of our work. When I say the court, I'm talking about the court and the stakeholders as well, in our offices, in our hallways, in the homes where we go serve, and certainly in our courtrooms. And being trauma responsive, which is a step beyond being just trauma informed, being trauma responsive is about people, places, and things. Sounds familiar, right? All the persons coming before us with addictions, we tell them they've got to change their people, places, and things. And so what we need to do first is change our own approach to this work, change the way we do business. But it is related to people, places, and things. Next slide, please. Dr. Okeson has already talked about this a little bit, is the ACE study was done through the rearview mirror, looking at adults talking about their adverse childhood experiences. But again, the children we serve are living the ACEs in real time. And again, I first came to really understand that when I did the state court judge's presentation, because a child who's before a state court judge, as an example, who's a parent, one of the parents been charged with domestic violence. We've got domestic violence in the home. In many cases, we have co-occurring substance abuse, alcohol abuse in the home. We also have oftentimes separation of the child from the parent, because in those cases, many times the parent's going to be initially locked up and then probably a no contact condition on the bond. If it's the mother experiencing that abuse herself, then how attentive can she be to her children? So you're often going to have some emotional and sometimes physical neglect. So the ACEs can add up very quickly. And these are for children who don't even come to the court. We don't even see them, but they're experiencing these consequences of these acts. For us in juvenile court, where I serve, we see the children. So again, we're reminded of it more often. Next slide. So when we're talking about a culture of healing, we have to first do no additional harm. Now, when you talk about a tough place to implement trauma-informed, trauma-responsive care, the court is an adversarial system by nature. It's really, really difficult to establish that kind of culture within the court, but we can do it in a way that people can still do their jobs, but not do additional harm when they come through the system. We'll talk about some specific things we've done about that in just a minute. And being trauma responsive in your business, and I'll say the courts, what we do, begins at the front door. Okay. This is Bill. I know you have metal detectors, you have all those sorts of things when you come in the building. Our courtroom's a huge marble building. And this is Bill. The first thing you see is Bill smiling and waving. He has a great personality for the work that we do in our building. But it begins that first look. I don't know if you've ever been to court as a participant before, whether it's a traffic ticket or whether it's a divorce or a condemnation lawsuit or whatever it might be. You're pretty nervous going in. You don't generally know what to expect for the general population. It's a scary moment for most people. And beginning to create your culture at the front door is very important. So when we talk about things we try to do in our court, and I know other courts around Georgia are doing it as well, it begins with awareness. When we first began our project, we were the Troup County Trauma-Informed Court Project. And through the influence of our stakeholders, we became a trauma-responsive community along the way. The idea is to raise awareness, train regularly, make sure all of your stakeholders, everybody in the building in your work is trained around trauma, and to be responsive, not just know about it, but respond to it in a meaningful way. Getting buy-in from all of your stakeholders, your staff and stakeholders, is a part of leadership. And it doesn't have to be the judge that's the leader. It can be an attorney, it can be the court administrator. You have to have a real champion to drive this work. It's important to have a judge that buys in, but not necessary. You can have another champion in your court that can, use the judge to drive some of this systems change. If we were in person, I would ask everybody to raise your hand if you ever went to the dentist and the dentist or the hygienist did not wear a mask. I get very few hands. I'm old, as you can tell, and I grew up as a young adult. The dentist did not wear a mask. The dental hygienist did not wear a mask. That came about with the AIDS epidemic, and it's called the universal precautions approach. They treated every patient that came in as if that person could expose them to AIDS. And that's the approach we need to take in the work that we do. We don't first have to diagnose someone with post-traumatic stress disorder. We treat everyone the same when they come in the building and create the culture so we don't have to decide what they've experienced and how they've been impacted by it. Engagement is extremely important, extremely important. In our courtroom, I try my best to engage all the participants in the process, even with the parents, and from a judge, it's not an adjudication, but at reviews, I'll ask the lawyer if they have anything to put up. If the lawyer says no, I will ask the parent, do you have anything you want to say? Because I've learned down the road that a lot of parents sit there, they want to tell me something, but their lawyer's told them not to. Again, I wouldn't do it in adjudication, but we engage them in a meaningful way. We let them know before the hearing starts what the hearing is about, what they can expect. And then at the close of the hearing, we need to ask them if they have any questions for the court. They can ask now to understand what happened. Now, those kind of colloquies are important. People have to be put at ease. Their physical and emotional needs need to be met in the building where we're doing our work if they're going to fully participate in the process. Right? Also referring to people about who they are. Let's not label people. We try to avoid the term addict and talk about person with an addiction the same that we do in other ways. It's very important to accept people's perception as their reality. Just like with a traumatic event, it's the perception of the harm has just great of impact as if there really is a legitimate risk of harm. Their perception is important in terms of how they respond to events. It's also important in terms of how they respond to us and our interventions. So we have to deal with their perception and honor their perception. Next slide, please. Okay, this is great here. I'm going to tell you about our ambassadors. So we join hands with our faith community, and these two angels you see in the heart on the left-hand side of the screen are our court ambassadors. They're volunteers from the faith community. Every time we have dependency court, one or both of them would be in the building. They make sure people's physical needs are met. We have nutritional snacks. We have water for them. But the main thing is they watch for people really getting stressed out. They try to put people at ease. So when the case gets called and they come in the courtroom, they can focus more and participate more in the process and understand what's going on. They do things like we have a reading nook in our waiting room. And they do things like approach the parent or the caregiver with a child. They don't ask, do you want to read your child a story? Because the parent may not be able to read. It's being trauma sensitive, right? They'll ask, do you want to read your child a story? Would you like for me to read your child a story? Those are the kind of things that we do in our court. Next slide. Even things like signage is important. Some people don't see it as being that important, but it is. Anything that enables you to feel safe moving about the building, knowing where to go and understanding what's going on makes you feel more at ease, where you can engage more in the process and again, not be harmed any more than you've been harmed before you come in the building. Next slide. Yeah, so reconstructing the environment, easier in some places than others, but we actually have only one or two of our waiting rooms shown here. And the big circle is the children's waiting room. That's the reading nook that we have in there. We also have another children's waiting room downstairs because, as you know, we have to keep children separate from perpetrators or just other people generally when things are going on. We have a lot of inspirational messaging around, some pretty cool stuff that we put up. Make it as colorful as we can, the rooms as small as we can. It says smaller, lower ceilings, more colorful. I'll show you our courtroom in a minute, and it's not that at all, but it's what we have. Let's go to the next area. Next slide. So this is our courtroom, 300 people, 30-foot ceilings, marble walls. It's pretty hard to be trauma sensitive in there, to create an environment in there. So this is a place where the people and things become more important than the place because we can't change the place. So it makes it more important that we engage people, make them feel at ease in there, make sure they understand what's going on. And again, we also have nutritional snacks and water in the courtroom as well that we can get to someone. So I've occasionally had a mother just get out of a chair and go pick up the basket of snacks and start walking around the courtroom serving people. That's not our intent, but at least she felt that at ease, right? So that's a positive thing we like to believe. Next slide. We found out once, this is the thing our ambassador did. We found out after we had our ambassadors that a few weeks before they started, it was so hot in the waiting room, people were actually feeling nauseous. We got to keep it comfortable in there. Keep it comfortable, as comfortable as you want to be in your own home. You know, make sure we meet people's physical and emotional needs. Open the blind and let some light in. Again, there's not a lot we can do in our courtroom, but light's healthy for you. Light's good for your mood. Right? Eliminate the indiscriminate shackling of children and adults. I don't know how we can expect a child or a parent to fully participate in a court process if they're shackled. Also, when you have a child in the courtroom and they're supposed to be there, in a dependency case, you have a child in the courtroom, they bring their mom and their dad in shackles. What does it do to that child? It may be the last time that child saw dad was when he was being taken away from the house in handcuffs and shackles. So think about the children when we think about this too. Look through the eyes of the children. It was pretty easy for us. We called a meeting. Well, actually, I invited our public defender to sue us first, and she did. We called a meeting, and the sheriff agreed immediately to not require kids to be shackled in the courtroom. And I asked, what about parents in dependency cases? And he said, sure. So in our courtroom, we have a process if there's a dangerous person. Otherwise, shackles are taken off of children and adults when they come in our courtroom. It's very important. All right, next slide. This is what the best we could do in our big courtroom is to stick some flowers in the windows, and I also have some plants behind me to create a little bit more friendly environment, at least the way it looks anyway. So next slide, Karli. Next slide. It's important for people to understand their expectations, if those expectations are reasonable. And folks in particular on dependency cases right now, you know, parents do not become more responsible because we take their children away from them. We need to set reasonable expectations. We need to communicate what's expected. And we need to demonstrate that we believe in them. You know, I think most accountability court judges say things to new participants like, we know you're going to be successful. If we didn't think you were going to be, we wouldn't let you in the program. But we don't say that as much in our regular dependency dockets. We don't say it quite as much probably in delinquency, although we really are trying to do a much better job of that. In identifying the needs and meeting those needs, a lot of things involved in that around case planning and things like that are very important. Dr. Okeson talked about positive childhood experiences. And that's something I've really kind of learned in the last year or two, that we need to celebrate those positive childhood experiences to help mitigate the harm done by the adverse childhood experiences. But even beyond that, we need to celebrate small victories in all of our cases and understand that for many of the people we serve, their success is just avoiding failure because they've never finished anything. They've never done anything great. They've never been in compliance. They've never had the great job, all these things, and just not failing is success. We need to honor and respect that, not in those words to them, but we need to honor and respect that. Build support systems, be sincere, be real, and build hope. When we think about the hard times in our own lives, it's things that got us through a lot of time is we saw something better at the end. And a lot of people we serve, and the circumstances in which we serve them, they don't see the end. We're talking about working a 12-month case plan to get your child back. They can't see past 30 days. They can't see past tomorrow. We got to build hope in the people that we serve. We've trained our law enforcement officers in Troup County around trauma. It's very important. Handle with Care. Many of you are available, aware of that program. It's a program where if a child experiences something traumatic in the community at night or over the weekend, then a notification is sent to the child's school. So that simply when that child shows up tomorrow, that child is handled with care. If the child is particularly overly vigilant, then deal with it as an adult. You make the change. You deal with it as an adult instead of reacting to it in the wrong way. If a child comes in the next day and lays her head on a desk, let her lay her head on the desk or get her to a safe place. So it's getting traction all over Georgia. I'm really excited about that program. Next slide. All right. Okay. And service providers. I'm not going to read all this to you, but it's so important. When we first started our journey, we didn't have a lot of service providers. We didn't have enough. We still don't have enough. But we certainly did not have enough service providers trained in things like trauma-focused CBT, EMDR, and all these other programs that we need. So we've really promoted in our community training for our service providers, mental health and behavioral health providers, so we can provide better services. We found out that the trauma assessments we were getting were not really all that good. So we've really worked hard to improve the quality and the quantity of our service providers in the county, get good assessments, make sure you match services with those needs identified in the assessments, and all those things we had on there. Okay. Next slide. So keep in mind, this is just another case for many of us. It's another client for many people. But for them, this may be the most important contact with the court system the parties will ever have. Whether it's a dependency action or divorce or personal injury or whatever it is, the most important contact with the court they would ever have. While it's important for us to take really good notes, and I take copious notes, I type them in hearings, you've also got to make eye contact. You got to look at people, certainly those that want to look at you. As we know in some cultures, making eye contact with a person of power or an official is considered to be disrespectful, but it's just part of that engagement that's not verbal. Okay, we got to build trust. We expect a kid to come into court on a delinquency case or at school and then enter into a behavioral contract. Really, a contract, they're going to trust us, right? Every person they've ever trusted in their life has disappointed them, have walked away, have left them. So building trust is really difficult. And it's a two-way street, but we have the responsibility as adults in the system, as a system providers, to take the lead in building trust in our relationships. And we need to check our own bias at the door, and our own trauma at the door before we come in. So the judge, Vincent Crawford in DeKalb County, shares this. He was doing working with some kids at a community center. He does a lot of that. These were 16, 17-year-old kids, males, and he was talking to them about the importance of going to school, working hard in your studies, behaving, all those things we try to teach our kids to do. This 16-year-old young man speaks up and says, Judge, with respect, everybody's journey to school is not the same. My journey begins with what happened in my home the night before. And the truth is, it's the night before, the week before, 3 years before. And that's what they bring with us when they walk in the schoolhouse door and in our offices and our courtrooms. Next slide. Oh yeah, just like everybody's journey to court's not the same. This is Linda's story. And I'm going to hold that because we want to take your questions first. If we have time at the end, I'll tell you Linda's story. Otherwise, it'll just be a teaser. So let's open up for questions. I think I'm in.
Awesome. So the very first one we have is from Judge Matthews from Gwinnett County. He says, informative topic. Thank you. I think so as well. He says, will the slides be shared with the participants so they can refer to them later? Is that okay to send out?
It is with me.
Yeah, it's okay.
Awesome.
And also these will be recorded and at some point put up so you can view them again later too.
Awesome. And then someone also says, is the ACEs study consistent across all gender, racial, and socioeconomic backgrounds and demographics?
So great question. There's been a lot of studies done since that original study, which has shown that there is increased risk of ACEs in different minority groups and low-income families, different ACEs for different genders, and accumulation along all those spectrums as well. And so, no, I guess is the answer. And the effects are consistent across everyone. So there's different attention given to different groups at times in different ways. But of course, amongst everyone, the topic is still important.
Awesome.
Yeah, there is some good information out there about that. And I would say that Dr. Terry McFadden, also from Emory, did a presentation at our judges conference this past spring. And she speaks to that in a very meaningful way about the differences. And I will say one additional piece, and it was touched on the slide about environmental issues, is historical trauma, which is a whole different subject. But we have to acknowledge that whatever your history is, whether you're Jewish, whether you're brown or black, you bring into our systems a different layer of trauma that some other populations did not bring in. And we have to very much be aware of that when we deal with those populations.
Absolutely.
Very good. So while people, you guys go ahead and put some questions into the chat box. Did you want me to go ahead and post that link for you in the chat?
Yes,
Awesome.
and I
Do
can
you want to
share
explain that a little bit to them?
the we have a post course handout that we're going to send everyone through email, and then it's also going to be in the chat link. And then I'll think, are we on time? Judge, you can share Linda's story while I put up this like conclusion slide that we have.
All right, so I will share with you Linda's story. Linda was a career prosecutor in Superior Court in Truth County, within the County Judicial Circuit, 5 counties. A really, really tough, hard-nosed prosecutor. In fact, when she first applied, she retired, and then she applied for the prosecutor's job in juvenile court. My court administrator was not so much in favor of that because Linda was just tough. I knew the other side of her because I also preside as adult felony drug court judge, and she was the team member from the DA's office there. I knew there was a little bit different side to what we saw in the courtroom. So she didn't get hired the first time, but later on, she was hired as our prosecutor. And we had a young man, 16 years old. And I won't share the details with you because they're horrific, the details. But I'll tell you that his father was killed in his presence. And it was gang related. So the family sent the young man to Mississippi to live with other family because they feared for his life here. Well, he didn't do well there. So the family sent him back here. And his way to respond to that was starting to break into every car that was unlocked in the county, it seemed like, in the city, living in the city. And it was just break in after break in after break in. I tried on 2 separate occasions to keep him in the community pending trial on housebound. GPS monitors, the whole works. We finally got to court another day, and he was up to 30 plus entering auto charges. And I had to make the decision to detain him, and I did. And he did find the courtroom. When he got in the back, he disrupted a little bit, not a lot, but he disrupted. And the mother stood up and wanted to head back there, understandably. And the child's lawyer was talking to her. Linda, this hard-nosed prosecutor, got up from her table, went across to where the mother was standing, told the lawyer, his name was Barry, said, Barry, you go take care of your client, I've got this. She wrapped her arms around the mother of that child that she had just argued that I should detain and embraced her for what seemed like an eternity. It was the last case of the morning. My job was done. I was very emotional about it. And as I started to walk out, I saw Linda pat on the table and tell her to sit down. I'm told that Linda stayed there and answered all of her questions, told her what's next. Now, did that undo the harm that was caused by her child disrupting, knowing what's going to go in the back caused to her? Well, no, it can't undo it, but it can certainly begin a healing process when you do it that way. So I came back out and I was thanking Linda for it because it's an amazing thing for her to do as a prosecutor. And she just made a light of it. I mean, it's what I'm supposed to do. I said, well, thank you anyway. It's pretty amazing you did that. And she was walking away and then she stopped and looked back and said, but I'm not soft. And that's the message, is we can do our job in a trauma responsive way and not be soft. Do I have time for one more story? Okay, I'll tell you one more story. I hope it's okay. This story is shared a lot by Dr. Gary McGivney, who used to be at the state school board. And he tells a story of a case where a young man was before a juvenile court judge on a shoplifting charge. And everything the judge saw about that young man indicated he should really get a diversion, not have to go through the whole process, not probation, just get a diversion. But what he wasn't seeing was any sign of remorse, any sign of remorse. And this goes back to, we can sometimes re-traumatize people or traumatize people by trying to do things the right way. So this judge is doing his best to say, I'm not going to put you on probation. I'm going to do a diversion, give you a second chance. But the kid didn't demonstrate any remorse. So the judge said, yeah, I don't know. So he asked the kid, are you sorry? Simple question. He's trying to find a way to give this kid a break. Are you sorry? The kid jumped up, knocked the table over. The deputies had to take him down, escort him out of the courtroom. The judge called a recess. And just on a hunch, he went out in the lobby and talked to the mother. So what is going on? What happened there? And the mother said, I'm sorry to say that I brought a man into our home in a relationship for years, not his dad, another man, who was abusive to me. And he told my son every day, you're sorry. You're sorry. You'll never amount to anything. You're sorry. So the kid heard the word, are you sorry? And that's what he lived again, was that emotional abuse he received from the male figure in his home. So we had to be careful of the words that we use. So those are my two stories. Any other questions? Dr. Okeson, your show.
You're muted, Dr. Okeson.
Oh, hello. That keeps happening.
There you go.
That's so powerful, and that's so true, is that we just really don't know like what they're coming from or what they have experienced, and being able to see that and recognize it is just so useful to do. And then that's our jobs on our side of it, is to not be soft, but to just be compassionate.
Very good. Awesome. So you guys, if you want to take a couple last little bit to put some questions in the chat box, if you don't feel comfortable putting your questions in the chat box for everybody to see, you can send them to me privately, or you can put them in the Q&A. You can do that as well if that's an option. Maybe if you don't want to, again, put a question in there you don't feel comfortable sharing with everybody. But really quick, I just want to let everybody know that in the chat box, the post-assessment link is in there. So again, the chat box to the right of your screen should reflect that the post-assessment link is there, but also an ACEs handout that Dr. Okeson very kindly put together for everybody. So you can find that ACEs handout link in there as well. So make sure you grab both before heading out today, but you're also going to get an email from me in the next 24, 48 hours with that link and the post-assessment link as well. So you'll have that in email. But if you want to go ahead and do it now and knock it out, you can. So that is in there. Again, you guys can take a couple seconds to put your questions in if you have any. And if you don't feel comfortable, you can always email them or put them in the Q&A and we can get to it. Did you have anything else to add, Dr. Okeson?
Nope, just thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Judge Keefe, for giving this lecture with me. This was fantastic. And I look forward to seeing everyone again next week.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you guys
everyone.
so
Have a good
much.
day.